Joining me now to talk about all of this on set is White House correspondent for Politico and, of course, the co-author of the Playbook newsletter. He's also an NBC News political analyst, Eugene Daniels. Chuck Rocha, who is the co-host of the Latino Vote podcast and the founder of the New Nestro PAC, and former Virginia Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Eugene, let's start with you. So it seems as though the judge is trying to find a middle ground here, dealing with the politics, but also dealing with the legal ramifications of all of this. But just purely from a political standpoint, dropping this in the middle of the primary calendar has to be a worst-case scenario for Republicans, isn't it?
It's great for Donald Trump, right? Because it's kind of, he wanted it either very late or after the election had already taken place. Mm-hmm. But for Republicans, that is likely the time period in which they will know who their nominee will be. It seems to continue to be likely that it's Donald Trump. So think about that. We get to that trial date, and it is the main person for Republicans is someone who's on trial. Mm-hmm. Independents aren't going to like that. A lot of Republicans aren't going to like that. And there's no going back. There's no take-backsies at that point. Yeah. You can't now put in someone else. It will be extremely unprecedented for that to happen. And so Republicans are continuing to kind of reap what they've sown over years, which is backing Donald Trump with no kind of way to wiggle their way out of that. And that's why they're stuck in the situation they're in now.
Barbara, I'm thinking back to 2016. You, of course, were a very vocal never-Trumper then. You remain a never-Trumper now. But, you know, there was kind of a very ill-fated effort to try and prevent Trump from getting the nomination, even to the point of the Republican Party convention. To Eugene's point, if he's already wrapped up the necessary electoral votes, but then is potentially on trial or even convicted, is there anything Republicans can do?
Well, I think you're having the prosecutors, Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson, point out the problems with having somebody, who's going to be the nominee, who's going to have multiple indictments against him. Chris Christie pointed out today that already, even before you have these trials, that 50% of Donald Trump's, campaign cash is going to legal expenses. Now, when you start going to trial, your costs astronomically increase. Mm-hmm. So if you're Joe Biden, you love this because the money is not going to a campaign. It is going to the lawyers and to the legal costs. So as someone who does not want Donald Trump to ever be president again, I think this is great. He's not going to be spending money on a campaign. But if you're a Republican who actually would like a Republican to win, Donald Trump is going to be spending money on lawyers and on covering his own butt, not on winning an election. So mind what the prosecutors are telling you. This is not. He's been losing for 7 years, and spending money on lawyers and not a campaign is not a winning strategy.
So, Chuck, from the Democratic's perspective, is Joe Biden making the right choice by not engaging when it comes to Trump's legal battles, letting the process play itself out and trying to stay out of the fray?
Joe Biden ain't got to say nothing. We're all talking about it nonstop. Every segment of every news channel, it's when somebody is digging themselves a hole, you don't reach in and take the shovel away from them. You let them keep on digging, and that's what's happening right now. In these presidential elections, I've run a presidential election. There's a big problem when you drop this right in between Super Tuesday and another primary because you're having to schedule and do all the others. This is going to be about turnout, turnout. There ain't nobody in America that's going to be persuaded to vote for or against Donald Trump, but they may be persuaded to stay home.
And you worked for Bernie Sanders, who was a candidate who liked being with the voters, being physically on the ground certainly helped him when it came to turnout. If Donald Trump is sitting in a courtroom somewhere, either in Florida or New York, in the midst of a primary, how damaging could that be in terms of his connection with voters?
It's all about momentum in presidential elections. Folks don't understand that from somebody who runs campaigns. In the last Super Tuesday election, momentum alone put Joe Biden over the top. He won states he had no staff in because of momentum. He won states he had never been to because of momentum. There are two different presidential campaigns that happen simultaneously. One is around the candidate with press, and the other one is in the state and in the field. And that's the campaign you're talking about, where he's never there to actually motivate folks to show up to vote.
And when he's in the courtroom, chances are he can't talk. He's going to have to take the fifth. His lawyers are not going to let him speak because he doesn't have a legal case he can make in court.
Despite their efforts to try and get cameras in the courtroom, which probably isn't going to happen. So Eugene, we have some new NBC News reporting that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is at this point the strongest challenger to President Trump, strong maybe too strong of a word to describe him, but that's what we're dealing with right now. He's planning on a campaign strategy shift. You've covered so many of these, right? It's almost like plug and play. But, they're going to do more intimate venues. He's going to shake more hands. He's going to do more mainstream media interviews. What does this tell us about the state of his campaign? And is this an opportunity for him to truly have a reset?
It tells us that they realize what they said at the beginning, which we're not going to be talking to the media that we hate, doesn't work. You can't do that nowadays. As much as you can kind kind of get around reporters. As you know, you can talk to, you can go on social media, you can talk straight to the folks that are on the ground, the people that are going to be voting. At the same time, narrative is so important in primaries. By momentum, narrative creates momentum. He currently has a narrative that people don't like him, that he doesn't have a campaign that can win in a general election, and that he can't beat Donald Trump in a primary. This is the only way to change that, to kind of rejigger things and hope for the best. That's kind of what campaigns are about. And so will this work? We'll see. Because a lot of the problem when I talk to Republican strategists is like, with this campaign, they feel like the candidate is the issue. It's not, how much money they're spending on ads, how many hands he shakes. Yeah. It's that the candidate might be the issue. And that is something that only one person can fix, and that's Ron DeSantis.
Did you have something to add, Chuck?
No, I was just going to say it's about momentum. When you start talking about the narrative and momentum, to my brother's point, Eugene, that's what happens in a campaign. And it's hard to do that when folks are saying you can't win, you're not Donald Trump. But if they, hey, I just reset my campaign, stay tuned, they're going to do the same thing, but at least they got back out there.
It's a death spiral with him. I mean, the problem is DeSantis. He is not, he's a joyless candidate. He is, it's not just that people don't like him. He doesn't like doing this. He doesn't like being out campaigning. He thought he was somehow going to be anointed. This is not enjoyable for him. He's now doubling down on his culture issues. He's traded in Disney now for he's going to do a Bud Light thing. When you think you can really look at his, he started going down when he went out and did this weak attack on Ukraine. And he couldn't even stand up to Putin. If you can't stand up to Putin, you certainly can't stand up to Trump, we know. So if you can't stand up to Putin or Trump, you're not a leader. He just thought he could kind of get the, endorsements from Elon Musk or Tucker Carlson. How's that working out? Those two disappeared sort of on the scene, and he's going nowhere. I think it's a death spiral.
You're the perfect person to ask this question, Barbara, because it seems as though there may be some desire within the Republican primary to find an alternative to Trump, but none of this field appears to be capturing that energy. Is there someone that isn't in the race yet, perhaps from your state, that could jump in at some point and have an impact?
I think you're going to see some. Listen, I mentioned Chris Christie. I think he's very joyful out there, having a good time. As he said, you've got to go through Donald Trump if you want to win this race. I think the other candidates are kind of catching on that if you want to, go at Donald Trump, you have to go through them. Are we going to see the other candidates catch on and do that? Because I think we know Ron DeSantis won't. If the others pick up on that, Chris Christie might give them an opportunity to realize that they too can do that. And if they take that opportunity, then I think that's the only path. If you're not going to take on the man, you're not going to be the man.
Part of the problem is that the people that the Trump voters might be interested in, someone like Ron DeSantis, they are not doing that. They're not going out, they're not saying that. And you do have the Chris Christies and the Asa Hutchinsons, the Will Hurds going out there and attacking Donald Trump.
You have to be a leader.
But the voters don't want them. Right? They do not want the Republicans that are pre-Trump Republicans. That has been very clear.
Well, they want a leader. I think you're seeing some of their numbers come up. Let them get out. Let them debate. See, I think it is having an impact. And so I think as Trump has more and more problems, and you've seen recently there've been 4 polls where Biden is leading Trump. So at a certain point, Trump's been losing for 7 years. How's that working out for us? If you don't like Biden policies, you have to stop picking Trump, who has been losing.
Chuck?
I think that you're right on path. That there's been so much money spent with Republicans to build this brand of Donald Trump. People forget that a lot of this has got people know Donald Trump. Guess what? They knew Bernie Sanders. They knew Joe Biden, who had also been the vice president for Barack Obama. For those of us who do advertising in TV and make mail and digital ads like I do, that branding means something. People know whether they love him or hate him. They know that Trump name on a plane, on a building, on a fine piece of red meat, whatever he's out there selling. But they don't know Ron DeSantis. They see a caricature that they hear people in Congress go, he ain't nice. They hear people report that he ain't even really into this. And then you just see all that break down to a death spiral, to your point. So that branding means something when you've spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build a brand, like it or not.
Okay, great conversation, everybody. Thank you for being here on a Friday. I appreciate it so much. Eugene Daniels, Barbara Comstock, and Chuck Rocha.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.